welcome back to the Game Collection. I've had a little bit of a break since the last time I played a Dragon Quest game after reviewing the first 4 NES titles last year, so I think it's time to dig in a little deeper into the series. So, I am SuperDerek, and this is Dragon Quest V for the Super Famicom. Dragon Quest V was developed by Chunsoft and continues a long-standing tradition of featuring artwork by Akira Toriyama, compositions by Koichi Sugiyama, and writing by Yuji Horii. Dragon Quest, it seems, is a series that is inseparably linked to tradition. It was released in Japan in 1992, and unlike its predecessors, Dragon Quest V never made it to the United States. Dragon Warrior was selling pretty poorly in the United States on the NES, most likely due to some combination of poor marketing and other lesser factors. Whatever the case, Enix was unsatisfied with the numbers they were seeing and gave up on seeing Dragon Quest rise in the West. Luckily, in the early 2000s, a few groups of fans put together a couple of different fan translations for the game. One translation was performed by Bu, which is said to take a more literal approach to translation. The other was a collaborative work between DJAP and partial translations, and is said to take more of a working design style approach on the philosophy of localization. Because I'm a fan of that approach, I played through the latter. Dragon Quest V begins with the birth of our hero, whom I named after myself naturally. The hero is born unto a king and his queen, but disaster of some form strikes, causing the king to set out on a journey to find the legendary hero, bringing along his son with him. And that's all that I will tell you about the plot in order to avoid spoilers, because unlike many games in this genre, this game zigs when you think the game is going to zag. What I will tell you is that Dragon Quest V is the most emotionally driven game in the series up to this point, and managed to create some of the most memorable and hateable villains in the series in the process. Dragon Quest V is also unique in many ways up to this point. The heroes of the game aren't exactly who you'd expect and often aren't even human. After defeating a group of monsters, the monster you defeat last has a chance of asking to join your party. Not all monsters are able to be recruited, and some monsters have only a very slight chance of asking to join even after dozens of fights. But when they do ask you to join your party, they can be swapped in and out of battle freely on the world map. Each brings with it a unique set of skills and stats that you can play around with until you find a strategy that fits your playstyle. Once you enter most dungeons in the game, however, your party is set in stone until you return outside, so finding a combination that is good for long expeditions is a must. Other gameplay mechanics are pretty much exactly what you would expect from a Dragon Quest game. Encounters are random, battles are turn-based, dungeons are long, and hidden mini-medals are tucked into barrels and corners across the world map. This no-frills boilerplate design feels like coming home. It's like comfort food for my JRPG-loving soul. It's pure, it's distilled, it's probably a huge pain for people who prefer their turn-based combat with a side order of novelty. But I think that in a world where pure turn-based RPGs are drying up, the relative plainness of this battle system is the novelty. But that's also not to imply that there is any lack of innovation. Dragon Quest V finally introduced automatic target switching if enemies died, meaning there are no more wasted turns in battle. New weapon type dynamics were introduced, such as the boomerang and whip that can attack multiple enemies in a single attack while sacrificing any chance of a critical hit. AI tactics for your team members, as seen in Dragon Warrior 4, could be turned on or off via the tactics menu and tweaked to offer more diversity. Outside of battle, weapons and armor shops display character stats so you can see who would benefit from certain items and who could even equip them in the first place. And the long-awaited multifunction button allows players to talk to people, open doors, and check for loot, all with the shoulder buttons. Visually, Dragon Quest V on the Super Famicom doesn't bring too much to the table at first glance. Much of the game appears to be a direct translation of the Famicom formula, with a few extra colors added to the mix. The world is made of poorly disguised tiles, everything is a square, and the sprites are small and simple. Making comparisons to Final Fantasy IV would be pretty fair. But every once in a while, Chunsoft cranks up the dial a little bit to show us things like large castles reflecting in the water, gorgeous waterfalls, and these gorgeous battle backgrounds. Something that I lamented about the later Dragon Warrior games on the NES is that the games failed to implement those awesome background images that we got to see in Dragon Warrior 1. Finally, those battle backdrops make a return, and this time they're even animated. Gone are the days of fighting against a black screen. Another nice touch is that you never fully leave the world map during these fights. It's subtle, but I think it aids in keeping the battles feeling short, painless, and seamless. Koichi Sugiyama returns in Dragon Warrior 5, and that's all I really need to say to you to know that the music in this game is fantastic. By this point in the Dragon Quest series, he's developed a signature Dragon Quest sound, which is less string orchestra and more symphonic band, which gives the soundtrack a big, grandiose, booming sort of sound, and many favorite songs from previous games have made a return, given new life and vibrancy by the Super Famicom's sound chip. Dragon Quest V was met with critical acclaim in Japan, as Dragon Quest games tend to do. In 2004, the game received a Japan-only remake on the PlayStation 2, featuring polygonal graphics and a moving camera, and a higher fidelity soundtrack to boot. While making this review, it actually looked so good that I'm already looking forward to spending a little time with that version of the game at some point. A few years after the release of the PS2 remake, that version of the game was ported to the Nintendo DS. For this release, the graphics were reined in a bit and character models were replaced with pixel-based sprites. Finally, in 2005, the Nintendo DS version of the game was ported over to iOS and Android phones. Dragon Quest V would be the final Dragon Quest that Chunsoft would work on, and what a way to go out. It's amazing. I can't recommend this game enough regardless of the system that you choose to play it on, and that's why it's got a spot in the game collection.